Have you ever, driven through a city and seen that beautiful old building, but it's clearly crumbling? Or maybe you're stuck on a train, delayed again, and you just think, why? Why is it always like this? How did things get this bad? I think we've all had that feeling. And it's a question that goes, well, a lot deeper than just an everyday annoyance. Today, we're actually going to try and tackle that mystery. You've brought us a whole stack of sources, articles, research notes that really paint a vivid and sometimes, pretty stark picture of how our cities have been shaped, or maybe unshaped over the years. And it's not just one single issue, is it? It's like this complex web of decisions, all interconnected, that define American cities and the infrastructure right under our feet. So let's unpack this.
It is fascinating, isn't it? How things that seem totally separate, like court decisions from decades ago, federal policies, even the kind of metal used in our plumbing, how they all come together to create the reality we see and live in today.
Exactly.
We're going to try and connect those dots for you.
That's the plan. Our mission with this deep dive is to shed light on those surprising forces, historical, political, economic, that are behind the challenges American cities and their infrastructure face. We want to give you that shortcut, To being really well informed on this critical topic, to understand not just what we're seeing, but the deep why behind those, visible cracks in our cities. Okay, so let's start with what our sources call the Great Divide, how policy and funding literally shaped the urban-suburban split we see now. You might think cities and suburbs just naturally evolved separately, but these sources make it really clear. This divide, it was deliberate. Policy choices, especially after the 1970s.
That's such a crucial point. Your materials point to the 1974 Supreme Court case, Milliken v. Bradley, as a real turning point. That ruling and other government actions around that time actively helped a massive shift of the white population out to the suburbs. And here's the key thing. Tax money didn't just follow the people, it was actively redirected. This fueled huge suburban growth, brand new roads, schools, water systems, sewage, all that stuff. And meanwhile, the infrastructure back in the cities, basically left behind by the folks moving out, saw its maintenance funding just dwindle, a gradual but really significant decline in investment.
And it wasn't just the population shift. The sources highlight these big financial hits cities took in the 1980s. That seems like another critical moment. During the Reagan and Bush administrations, federal grants to big cities just plummeted. We're talking, 35% over the decade?
Yeah, a 35% drop, from about $5.2 billion down to $3.4 billion. That's huge.
Huge. And these cuts hit crucial areas. General revenue sharing, public service jobs, job training programs. I mean, just imagine being a major city back then. Suddenly you have to cut entire departments, maybe youth programs or community development things. The immediate hit on people must have been devastating and long-lasting, too.
Right. And it makes you ask, well, what happens when city schools, already struggling, lose that kind of funding? The sources are pretty blunt about it. The effectiveness of schools for both Black and white kids in cities went down significantly. And that directly created this deep educational gap, this economic divide. Poor urban kids who did manage to get to college were demonstrably doing worse than rich kids from the suburbs.
And one really alarming result of those cuts, according to what you've shared, is that school buildings just didn't get replaced. They got older and older. Which brings us right to the hidden dangers in those older city buildings. Lead contamination. Flint, Michigan in 2015 really brought that home, didn't it? A tragic example of this neglect.
Absolutely. And the history of lead pipes is quite revealing here. When city water systems were expanding or being repaired, this is like before World War I, cast iron pipes often got replaced with lead ones. Why? Not for health. Because lead pipes lasted longer. Especially in cities where the water was naturally acidic or soft, that kind of water corroded cast iron pretty quickly.
So people liked the soft water, but that same acidity actually made the lead erode faster too.
Exactly. It was a double-edged sword. And the health difference is stark. Corroding iron or zinc, generally not harmful, but lead, unequivocally dangerous. The source of stress, it affects kids' intelligence development, causes disease. And here's the really wild part. Public health officials knew back in the 19th century. They knew lead was bad.
They knew back then.
But the water companies, they prioritized, and the sources used these exact words, lowering their costs and getting more durable pipes. Basically, economics won out over known health risks.
Wow. That's really something. It sets a pattern, doesn't it? Prioritizing short-term costs over long-term well-being. We're still dealing with the fallout.
We absolutely are. And connecting that history to today. Underfunding now means city school systems are still using these buildings, some over a century old. After Flint, lots of places started testing and realizing their old schools aren't just, a bit run down or depressing, they're actually dangerous because of lead in the water. It's a direct line.
And the attempts to fix it haven't really worked, have they? There was a law in '86 to upgrade school water systems.
Right, but that was largely struck down by a federal court in 1996. So what's left is basically a 1991 EPA rule. Periodic tests, and the safe limit for kids set at 15 parts per billion.
But periodic tests aren't foolproof, as Flint showed us.
Not at all. And what's really concerning, and your sources are very clear on this, is that Congress hasn't funded fixing Flint's pipes. And it's not likely to fix the problems in other urban school systems either. It ties into this broader pattern, this idea of the FTE sector, the full-time employed sector. They aren't really pushed, incentivized to use their property tax dollars for these urban schools, which mostly serve kids from the low-wage sector.
Because it doesn't affect them directly.
Pretty much. The people with the most political and economic clout are largely insulated from the problem, so it persists.
Which kind of leads us to this bigger idea. You mentioned how these conditions created what the sources call a dual residential system. You have low-wage workers stuck in, frankly, decrepit cities, while the FTE sector lives in these ever more separated suburbs. It's a physical and social separation.
It really is. And the detachment of that FTE sector is striking. Your sources say they do not experience many of the urban problems. They live separately. They might visit the city, but only when they choose to. It even suggests some of them probably think that America's urban troubles belong to a separate, less developed country.
Wow. That's a stark thought.
Yeah. And even the very wealthy, the plutocrats who might move into fancy high-rises downtown, they often stay only partially engaged. Private cars, private schools for their kids. Their city experience is very curated, very different.
Okay, so this deep dive also brought up a really interesting concept to help explain some of the decay. Defensible space. This comes from Oscar Newman, right? A city planner involved in that big Yonkers housing case back in 1980.
That's him. His theory was that certain kinds of public housing, especially big, concentrated high-rises, could actually destroy social capital by creating these public areas, hallways, lobbies, grounds that basically no one cares for, no one feels responsible, and that, unfortunately, can encourage illegal and violent behavior.
And Yonkers was a prime example.
It really was. They put public housing all in one area, built tall towers to save land, but critically, they didn't fund the upkeep properly. So elevators broke down, hallways became, as the sources say, disreputable and often dangerous. People might keep their own apartments nice, but just getting to them meant going through these unsafe, neglected public zones. No one really controlled them, so they deteriorated.
So Newman's big idea was basically space that no one controls always deteriorates. Simple, but powerful.
Exactly. And the opposite is defensible space. Space that someone clearly is responsible for maintaining. Like, a front yard for a ground floor apartment, or maybe a dead-end street where neighbors feel some ownership and keep it safe and clean. It's about design fostering responsibility.
So looking back, the implication is that public policy, even when trying to help, sometimes made things worse.
Inadvertently, yes. Planners in the 50s and 60s didn't grasp this defensible space concept, so they designed projects that unintentionally undermined community spirit, weakened social capital. And this got worse because, let's be frank, many white suburbanites didn't want public housing, which was often largely black, built near them, so it got concentrated, often in these poorly designed buildings. And it's not just about history. The sources also mention researchers like William Wilson and Charles Murray. Their work shows that ongoing issues like unemployment and poverty right now erode social capital in both black and white neighborhoods in the North. It's not just some distant legacy.
It's a tough picture. But you did find something hopeful in the research about moving out of these environments.
Yes, there is that. Recent studies show that when African-American families manage to move out of what the sources call toxic buildings and neighborhoods, they start to regain some of the lost social capital. It often takes a generation to see the full effect, though. You see it in their kids maybe attending better schools, living in safer places, being more likely to go to college themselves.
So it really underscores that it's not just the legacy of slavery, as profoundly damaging as that is.
Right. It's also the current conditions, the conditions in which poor African Americans are forced to live today, partly rooted in that history. Of course, those conditions actively erode their social capital. They block the progress made in education back in the 60s and 70s. It's an ongoing cycle, linking past injustice to present barriers.
Okay, let's pivot now from the social side to the literal physical crumbling of the nation's infrastructure. Because this isn't just about schools and housing in specific cities. The sources show this neglect impacts everyone. It hurts mobility, affects daily life for millions.
Absolutely. There's the American Society of Civil Engineers, the ASCE. They do this infrastructure report card every few years. Back in 2013, the overall grade for American infrastructure was a D. Just a D.
A D, that's barely passing.
Barely. And their reasoning was pretty clear. Delayed maintenance and underinvestment across most categories, just not keeping up.
And the specifics are pretty worrying. Bridge has got a C-plus grade, but even then, 1/3 of the total bridge decking area is structurally deficient. And the average age is over 40 years, getting close to that 50-year design life. That feels like we're pushing our luck.
We are. And mass transit. That got a D. Rail systems, which handle about 1/3 of transit trips, have this enormous maintenance backlog, like $59 billion needed for rail, compared to $18 billion for non-rail systems. And many of these systems, especially in places like New York, Chicago, Boston, they're some of the oldest pieces of infrastructure still in daily use. They're ancient and carrying huge numbers of people.
The Northeast Corridor, D.C. to Boston, seems like a really stark example of transit failure. The sources explain how the interstate highways in the 50s really undercut the railroads financially. The government built roads for trucks, but railroads had to maintain their own tracks. Then Amtrak comes along in '71 to save passenger rail, but Congress makes them run unprofitable routes.
Yeah, ridership doubled since '71, but they couldn't optimize. So the tracks, the power lines, bridges, tunnels, they all started wearing out, leading to constant delays, cancellations, and the cost of failure is huge. A single-day shutdown on the Northeast Corridor, estimated to cost the country $100 million.
Wow, $100 million a day.
And political decisions just keep making it worse, don't they?
Yeah.
The sources point to Chris Christie when he was governor of New Jersey, canceling that planned third rail tunnel under the Hudson River in 2010.
Right, I remember that. It would have added capacity for, what, 70,000 more commuters a day? Helped reliability, cut down on car traffic?
Exactly, but it got scrapped, officially over cost overruns and because the state gas tax was low. But the result? Continued congestion and unreliability for hundreds of thousands of people. A direct political choice with real consequences.
And it's not just New Jersey. Boston's subway meltdown in the winter of 2015. Governor Baker didn't want to spend or raise taxes, even with $7 billion in needed repairs identified. Or the D.C. Metro. It's half the age of Boston's T, but it's described now as a terrible mess on the edge of being unsafe. And Congress won't step in to bail out it. It's the same story everywhere.
It really is. And connecting it back to that FTE low-wage sector idea, it seems clear many in the FTE sector would rather keep their taxes low than consider investments that may indirectly help them, much less the needs of the low-wage sector. So you have this odd situation. Economists are scratching their heads, wondering why governments don't borrow and upgrade infrastructure when interest rates are basically zero. But politically, the supporters of lower taxes win the day.
Even that 2015 infrastructure bill, the sources say it was mostly just for highways, to ease traffic jams, which appeals more to the FTE commuters.
That's right. It was only for highways and to relieve congestion. Important, maybe, but just a small part of the planned spending needed overall. A very targeted fix for a much bigger problem.
So, after digging through all this, what does it all mean? We've traced this path through decades of choices, lead pipes, housing design, transit funding cuts. We've seen how they all weave together to create the challenging reality in our cities, affecting our daily lives. It's definitely complex, this interplay of policy, money, history, social dynamics.
It really reveals a pattern, doesn't it? A consistent prioritizing of, let's say, short-term savings and keeping communities separate over investing in long-term communal health and shared infrastructure, which makes you ask the tough question. When these infrastructure problems mostly hit the low-wage sector and the FTE sector doesn't want to foot the bill, what are the real accumulating costs? And who, ultimately, pays the highest price for that approach?
Absolutely. It's something to think about. Maybe the next time you're stuck in traffic or your train is delayed or you hear about another city budget crisis, ask yourself, how much of this is just bad luck and how much is the direct result of choices, deliberate choices, often unexamined, made years or decades ago? And maybe the even bigger question is, what would it actually take for us as a society to redefine what a truly well-maintained, well-invested community looks like? For everyone, not just for some. That's definitely something to chew on as we navigate those invisible cracks all around us.